All right, so chapter 21, Attack and Counterattack. The morning after the trouble at the fountain, Dune awoke to a clamor arising through his window from the front of the hotel. He looked out, but he could see only the tops of people's heads, all clustered around the front steps. He ran downstairs with his shirt still unbuttoned, flapping around him, to see what was happening. The doors of the hotel stood open. Through them, he saw that a heap of trash had been dumped on the front steps. He went closer and looked. The pile seemed to consist of rotten vegetables and filthy rags, scattered all over with shiny green leaves and sharp twigs and long creepers pulled up by their dirty roots. Dune stared at it with the same sick feeling he'd had when he saw the black words on the hotel walls. It wasn't so much the pile itself that made him feel sick. It was that whoever did this hated the people of Ember, and hated Dune himself in particular. This was an act of revenge. He went outside, edging around the pile. Clary was standing on the step just below it, peering down at the leaves and branches. Why would they bother to scatter leaves on everything, she said. And they're all the same kind, too. She picked up a sprig and looked closely at the bright green leaves, rubbing them between her fingers, sniffing them. Strange, she said. But most people were too upset to pay attention to the contents of the pile. An angry buzz filled the air, and now and then, one voice or another rose above the rest. This is an outrage. It was a clear, sharp voice. Tick's. Dune was sure. Then a high voice. I hate them. I hate them. That must be Lizzie. And sure enough, there she was, standing near Tick, dunking her shoes in a bucket of water to get the dirt stains off. After a while, Tick climbed the steps and clapped his hands. All right, everyone, he called. We've been attacked again, and this is worse than the first time. It's a disgusting insult, and it fills us with rage. But all we can do right now is get this mess off our doorstep. Let's get busy and clean it up. Everyone did. They picked up armloads of leafy vines and carried them away. They shoved the garbage down onto the ground and kicked it into the bushes. They brought buckets of water up from the river and sloshed them over the steps until everything was more or less clean. Tick supervised all this, calling out directions, though he didn't do any of the actual work himself, Dune noticed. Doesn't want to get his clothes dirty, thought Dune rather grumpily. When the cleanup was done, people stood around and argued. Some were for marching down to the town that very minute, confronting the town leaders and demanding that the vandals be punished. Other people said no, it wasn't good to cause trouble. It would just make everything more unpleasant, and anyway, it wasn't the whole village that was against them, only some of them. But which ones? Someone yelled. And how do we stop them? They have to be stopped. I'm tired of being blamed and punished, cried someone else. I'm tired of being starved. And what about winter? Someone yelled. The word had spread, and people had added this to their list of grievances. Are we just going to sit here and take this treatment? No, no, no. Dune could see Tick moving through the crowd, bending to speak into the ear of one person and then another. As people listened, their eyes narrowed and their lips tightened, and they turned to Tick and nodded. The shouting died down after a while because people couldn't agree on a course of action. If they didn't go to work, they wouldn't get any lunch, so most of them went back to their ordinary routines. They washed their hands and faces in the river, they ate what remained in their parcels for breakfast, and they headed up the road toward the village. Dune and his father went too, though Dune went reluctantly. Father, he said, this is the third time they've attacked us. Don't you think we have to do something? What do you propose to do? His father said. I don't know, said Dune, but we have to do something. We can't just let ourselves be trampled, can we? Son, said Dune's father, I don't know the answer. We're in a tough situation here. He clasped his hands behind his back and walked for a while, looking down at the road. It does seem that something is called for, he said finally. The trouble is that violence just leads to more violence, so I don't know. Dune's team was assigned to the cornfield that day. He and his father spent hours on their knees, yanking prickly weeds out of the ground. Dune's arm itched. He kept having to stop and scratch it. Was a mosquito biting him? He scratched and scratched again. It felt like 50 mosquito bites, not one. He had them on his other arm, too. Both arms itched like crazy. Finally, he stopped working and held his arms out in front of him. From wrist to elbow, they were carpeted with red lumps. Look, father, he cried, I have a rash. What is it? I don't know, son, his father said, but I have it too. The itchy rash spread over the arms and hands and faces of all the Emberites who had helped with the cleanup that morning. What is this? People said as they worked in the bakery and the bike shop, the brickyard and the tomato fields. They itched, they scratched, and the rash spread and oozed and itched still more. The villagers knew what it was. Poison oak, they said. They explained about the oil on the leaves and how you only had to touch it to get the rash. You must have been scrambling out around in the woods, they said. But the Emberites had not been scrambling in the woods. They knew how they'd been poisoned. Someone had done it to them on purpose. Fury spread among the Emberites like a fire. Those who'd heard about the poison oak raged about it to those who hadn't, and before long everyone knew. Diggers threw down their shovels. Fruit pickers pushed the ladders to the ground and stalked out of the orchard. Someone in the bakery flung a great clump of dough at the supervisor, and someone in the egg shop hurled 3 eggs at the wall. The terrible itching aggravated everyone's anger, and before long, the people of Ember began to gather in the streets and in the plaza, and the gathering became a crowd, and the crowd became a mob. Dune ran into the village with the other field workers, and he found himself in the middle of this mob. He heard Tick's voice from somewhere nearby. They gave us poison. What shall we give them? When there was no response but a confused babble, the question came again, louder. What shall we give them? This time, an answer came, a crash and a tinkling of shattered glass. Someone had thrown a rock through the window of the town hall. Cheers arose, and all around him, Dune saw people suddenly bending over, looking for rocks to throw. More crashes, more yells. People started snatching things from the stalls. A jar of jam came sailing overhead. Arms reached up to catch it, but it fell past them and landed a few feet from Dune, smashing open and splattering his legs with sticky red goo and splinters of glass. He saw people stuffing muffins into their pockets, and he saw Tick with his arms stretched backward, ready to throw a rock at the windows of the tower. He saw Miss Thorne running with her hands shielding her head, and the Hoover sisters backing up into the egg shop, trying to get away. He was frightened suddenly. At that moment, the doors of the town hall opened, and Ben Barlow strode out. His face was twisted with rage. Stop them, he shouted. Stop these thieves and vandals. You poisoned us, shouted someone in the crowd. We've had enough, shouted someone else, and threw a potato right at Ben. It hit him in the stomach, and he bent over, his mouth dropping open. A roar came from the crowd. Tick's voice rose above the others. Fill your pockets, he screamed. Fill your pockets and run. There was a mad scramble, and then the Emberites pushed their way out of the plaza and raced down the streets to the river road. Dune ran too. He saw Tick up ahead of him, sprinting fast, his shirt tails flying. Now we really are thieves and vandals, Dune thought. Was this a bad thing? Or was it exactly what the people of Sparks deserved? That night, Tick went up and down the corridors of the hotel, knocking on doors and urging people to come to his meeting. They did come, at least 100 of them by Dune's count. They gathered at the head of the road as the daylight was fading. Dune saw Chet and Gil and Allie and Elvin from his old class at the Ember School, along with people he knew from the pipeworks, people who he knew from Ember's shops, and others. Most of them were boys and men, but there were women and girls too. Most were silent, but some whispered excitedly to each other. They formed a semicircle in front of Tick, who had climbed onto a tree stump. Dune saw Lizzie standing near Tick, gazing up at him wide-eyed. The moon shone behind Tick's head. It gave a silver edge to his hair, but left his face in darkness. All right, Tick said. His voice was quiet, but instantly the whispering stopped. Our time has come. They have attacked us 3 times now. Today we showed them a little of our anger. We made them understand that we won't be taken advantage of anymore. They must know that if they hurt us, they will be hurt too. We will strike back. We are warriors now. Murmurs of approval rumbled through the crowd. Dune, who was standing at the rear, heard several people echo Tick's words. Strike back. Yes, we have to strike back. We are warriors. We must be ready, Tick said. When the next confrontation comes, we won't be as disorganized as we were today. We'll have a plan, and we'll be armed. More murmurs and a ripple of excitement. How will we arm ourselves? Tick asked. He answered the question himself. We have what we need right here where we live, he said. Look in your bathrooms. You'll find strong metal rods there, just the right length and enough for everyone. People looked at each other in puzzlement. Metal rods in the bathroom? But Dune knew immediately what Tick meant. The towel racks. Take them off the wall, and you have a sturdy weapon that could do real damage. Bruise soft flesh, even break hard bone. Tick waited until the word was passed through the crowd and everyone understood about the weapons in the bathrooms. Then he said, There are other ways to arm yourself too. Did you bring a knife with you from Ember? Are there still slivers of glass left in the windows of your room? Have you noticed that some of the stones by the river are just the size to fit in a fist? Again, he waited. All around Dune, people were nodding and whispering. Dune tried to imagine what the uprising earlier that day would have been like if the rioters had been swinging steel rods and striking out with knives and broken glass. People would have been hurt. There would have been blood. But think of the hurt the villagers had inflicted on the Emberites, the pangs of hunger, the humiliation, the name-calling, the terrible itchy rash. Didn't one hurt deserve another? Wasn't he simply being squeamish to shrink from it? He would have to strengthen himself, he thought. Not just his body, but his spirit, his will. It would take a kind of strength he didn't have yet to strike another person with the intent to harm. Tick was bending forward now and speaking in a softer voice. People shushed each other and listened. Go back now and sleep, my warriors, Tick said. In the next days, prepare your weapons and prepare your will. Remember how you felt when you saw those ugly words scrawled on our walls. Remember how you felt when the poison rash crawled up your arms. The people of Sparks will wrong us again, we can be sure of that. When it happens, we'll be ready. After the meeting, Dune walked back to the hotel feeling vaguely uneasy. Tick must be right, but somehow Dune couldn't feel wholehearted about being a warrior. Was it because he was a coward? He didn't want to be a coward. He didn't really think he was one. What was his problem then? End of chapter 21. Okay, let me scroll back up chat. I think I missed a bunch. Oh my goodness, Grace came in. Hi, Grace. Happy Thursday. Happy Thanksgiving. I think Colie should be an audiobook reader person. Oh my God, I would love that. I would absolutely love if that was my job, to just read all day. Oh my God. I would do it. I would do it. Goob, hello. Happy Thursday. Happy Thanksgiving. Slay that reading. Let's go. Such a good readist. Thank you. I read and mess up the words every 5 minutes. Oh my God, Car, I do too. Like, I mess up the words a lot. It's fine. It's fine. You just keep going. You just keep going. I do better if I pre-read books. Yeah, like these are books that I've read before. Not for a long time, but I have read them before, so it's not like a brand new book. If it was a brand new book, I'd probably have a lot harder of a time reading. Oh no, the bagel's not safe today. I'd offer biscuits and gravy, but we inhale them. Oh my gosh, Grace, those looked so good. Colie needs biscuit today. I do. Oh my God, biscuits with gravy. If that was my Thanksgiving, I would be in heaven. Like that would just be so good. McClellan, happy Thursday. Happy Thanksgiving. Let me do another hydrate. Let me do another hydrate. Jar hunks while you're chatting. Let's go. Okay, we got to hydrate in. Mosquito bites are the worst. We got the babies out and they're wildin'. I want an everything bagel with cream cheese and smoked salmon. Ooh, that sounds like a good breakfast. I actually, so I was starting to use this lotion the past couple days that like I've had. It could be expired. I'm not sure if that's the reason that I broke out because it's supposed to be like a really good lotion. And it's like something that I should be able to use with my like allergies and everything. But I broke out in like such a rash on both of my arms. And so I'm like, oh, and it's so itchy. So I feel the emberites. I feel them on such a level. Happy Thanksgiving, McClellan. There's a stream overlay ad. No, I hate when they do that. Is that something you consent to? I'm not sure if you can like choose what kind of ads you have. I don't know because I feel like they don't give you a ton of like customization with the ads, especially since they changed it, like the settings, which is kind of annoying. What a visual. I know these books are very descriptive, which I really love. I really love how like they really paint the picture of what you're reading. Mrs. Norris, I'm not going to use sound commands. Oh, they're so fun though. They're so fun. We can always do it during the little chatting breaks. You would rock it for sure. I would love it. Oh my God, I would so love it. HS, happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thursday. We usually do cinnamon rolls for breakfast on holidays, but we mixed it up today. Ooh, cinnamon rolls are good. Cinnamon rolls are good. My skin is weirdly sensitive to most lotions. Grace, I have such sensitive skin. I'm allergic to anything artificially scented. So I have to use everything that's either like naturally scented or unscented. And so I really have to like pay attention to like ingredients of everything. My skin really likes Nivea. I've heard that people like that one. I've been using Gold Bond, which has been pretty good. I was using Everyone lotion, but that one is oil based, so I think it was making me break out a little bit. Not badly, but like kind of. But welcome NHS. Tato, hello, happy Thanksgiving. Welcome in. Welcome into the reading. My skin loves Nivea too and Lubriderm. Ooh, okay. I'll keep those ones in mind. So far, the Gold Bond is working pretty well. I've been using a face one and a body one, which have been pretty nice. Been pretty nice. But I'll definitely keep those in mind too. Okay, let's get on to the next chapter. Oh my gosh, I feel like I need to like sneeze. Okay. Chapter 22, Discoveries. When Lena awoke the next morning, she thought there was something wrong with her eyes. Everything had gone gray. She sat up and looked around. No, it wasn't her eyes. It was the air that was wrong. It was so thick she could hardly see through it. The truck was merely a dark shadow. The buildings of the city had vanished entirely. From somewhere in the murk, she heard Casper's voice. He was muttering to himself, as he had been the night before. But she could hear only a low, growly sound, no words. A dark shape appeared and moved towards her. It was Maddie. She bent over and whispered, "Don't get up yet. Lie back down." "What's wrong with the air?" Lena asked her. "It's called fog," Maddie said. "It comes in off the water. Now lie down, curl up." Lena lay down and pulled the blanket up under her chin. Maddie knelt beside her and whispered, "Pretend you're sick. Moan and groan a little. Refuse to get up. I'll explain later." Lena followed instructions. She stared up into the swirling grayness and whimpered a little. It wasn't hard to pretend she didn't feel good. She rarely felt so cold and miserable in her life. She saw Maddie and Casper huddling together, two shadowy humps in the fog. They were talking, and their voices rose, but she couldn't make out what they were saying. She must have gone to sleep again. When she opened her eyes, the fog was thinner. A pale sun like a circle of paper shone through it. Without sitting up, she looked around for Maddie and saw her sitting on the back of the truck eating. She didn't see Casper anywhere. "Maddie?" she whispered. Maddie jumped down and came over to her. "You can get up now," she said. "He's gone." Lena sat up. "Gone?" Maddie nodded. "Into the ruins. He won't give up this notion of finding treasure. Something in his mind has slipped, I think. He wasn't all that steady to begin with, and now he's lost his balance." She took Lena's hand and pulled her to her feet, and together they folded the blanket. "He wants you to help him with his search. Go into the small spaces where he can't go. I told him you'd help tomorrow, but today you weren't well. So he went off to look around by himself. Preliminary exploration, he called it." "I don't want to help him," Lena said. "You aren't going to," said Maddie. "We're leaving." "We are? When? How?" "Now," said Maddie. "Come and help me." Maddie climbed up onto the truck, unstrapped the two bicycles, and handed them down to Lena. She opened the food chest and took out some of the remaining traveler's cakes, along with 2 water bottles, and she wrapped these in blankets and tied them with rope. "Here," she said to Lena, "this pack is yours, and this bike." "You mean we're going to ride all the way back to Sparks?" Lena thought with horror of the vast empty distance and the blazing heat. "We won't have to ride all the way," Maddie said. "There are lots of roamers. Someone will help us." "And we just leave Casper here by himself?" Lena wasn't sure that even someone as unlikable as Casper should be abandoned in this terrible place. "He'll be fine," said Maddie. "He has his truck and all his supplies. He doesn't need us." So they tied the packs onto their backs. They walked the bikes across the rubbly part of the road until they came to the place where it opened out into the long downhill curve. Just when the fog lifted and the air came clear, Lena turned around to take a last look at the city she had such hopes for, the city she thought might be a home for the people of Ember. In the sunlight, it looked more sad than terrible. Over the rolling grass-covered mounds, the skeletons of the old towers stood like watchmen. The trees bent their backs before the wind, and the wind swept ripples across the surface of the green water that wrapped around the city's edges. Maybe, thought Lena, the sparkling city she'd seen in her mind was a vision from the distant future, not the distant past. Maybe someday the people of Ember, or the great-great-grandchildren of today's people of Ember, would come back here and build the city again. "All right," said Maddie. "Let's ride." Lena flung her leg over the bike and settled herself on the seat. This was a bigger bike than the one she was used to. She gripped the handlebars, gave a push with her foot, and she was off. From the start, the bike moved so fast she hardly had to pedal. She zoomed forward, going far faster than even her fastest running. The wind in her face swept her hair out behind her, shot through her clothes, nearly peeled back her eyelids. The bumps in the road made the handlebars buck like something alive. She held on with a steel grip. It was absolutely terrifying and absolutely joyful. Down the long hill they went, she and Maddie alone on the wide, empty highway. No need to pedal at all, only steer around broken places or bits of debris. The fast air came into Lena's mouth and buffeted down into her lungs, and she laughed out loud. It was such a glorious freedom. When the slope leveled out a little, she steered the bike in big curves, back and forth, and Maddie did too. They whooped and laughed and raced each other, and alongside them the white birds swooped too, screeching in their shrill voices. Then came a long stretch of flat road and hard pedaling. With many stops for resting and eating and drinking water, they rode all day. Lena's seat was sore and her legs grew tired. Blisters rose on her hands from holding so tight on the handlebars. But Maddie said, "Just a little farther, and then we'll stop." And Lena kept going, finding strength when she thought it was gone, until at last, at the end of the day, they came to the place where the water ended and they could begin to turn eastward toward the hills. Here they stopped for the night. They found a creek with a trickle of clear water running along the bottom. Maddie said the round green leaves that grew on the creek's banks were good to eat, so they had those with their traveler's cakes, along with some wild onions and a few blackberries they found deep in a thicket of bramble. There was no cold wind here, as there had been near the city. The evening was warm and still, except for the chirping of frogs in the creek. They spread their blankets on the ground. Somewhere in the dark, an owl hooted softly, and another answered. Maddie was lying on her back with her hands clasped over her wide stomach. To Lena, gazing at her profile against the sky, she looked like a small range of hills, solid and comforting. So Lena dared to ask a question that had been troubling her. Maddie, she said, could there ever be another disaster like the one that came before? Or even worse? What if every single person and every single animal was killed? Don't worry, said Maddie. People didn't make life, so they can't destroy it. Even if we were to wipe out every bit of life in the world, we can't touch the place life comes from. Whatever made plants and animals and people spring up in the first place will always be there, and life will spring up again. Maddie turned over and tugged her blanket around her neck. Time to sleep now, she said. More hard riding tomorrow. In the morning, they were on their way as soon as the sun rose. Lena groaned as she got on her bike again. Her muscles were sore from yesterday, but she soon warmed up, and for a long time the road was flat and the riding was easy. After an hour or so, Lena spotted something moving up ahead of them, a dot in the distance. Look, she called to Maddie, who was a little way behind her, and she pointed. I think it's a truck, maybe a roamer. In 10 minutes or so, they had caught up to it. The man driving the truck turned when he heard them calling. Surprise lit up his face, and he halted his oxen and jumped down. Greetings, he cried. Glad to see some travelers. Haven't met anyone on the road for 4 days. He was a short, stocky man with a wild fuzz of black hair that stood out several inches all around his head. Pelton Moss was his name, and he indeed was a roamer, as was easy to see from the crates and barrels on his truck. All his containers were nearly empty, though. He had sold his most recent load of goods to a remote South Bay settlement. Now he was heading back in the direction of Sparks. I'll take you with me, he said, if you'll help me with collecting on the way. And so, for 5 days, Lena got to be a roamer. At every ancient abandoned town, they stopped and combed through the derelict houses. Not much was left. These houses had been picked nearly clean in the last 200 years. But sometimes, if they looked carefully, they found things the previous roamers had overlooked, or things they had thought worthless. Lena loved these searches. In some ways, it was like being a messenger back in Ember. She could go everywhere, look in every forgotten corner, and if she was lucky, make discoveries. And she was lucky. She found a silver locket with a picture of someone inside. Though the picture was so old and stained, she couldn't tell if it was a woman or a baby. She found a small round pane of glass with a handle. The glass made whatever you looked at appear bigger. A magnifying glass, said Pelton. Nice. She found a tiny red truck with wheels that still turned. She found a strip of leather with a buckle and 2 round metal pieces attached to it. It was too short to be a belt. There were words on the metal circles, but they were so worn she couldn't read them. That's a dog collar, Pelton told her. Not very useful, but interesting. At a house that stood by itself far out in a field, she opened a cabinet on a back porch, where the screen was hanging in brown flaps. In the cabinet was a box that said Monopoly in faded letters on its lid. Inside were tiny dotted cubes and tiny bits of wood shaped like houses. Wonderful, Pelton exclaimed. Extremely rare. There was another box in the cabinet with a picture of a garden on top and a heap of oddly shaped pieces of cardboard inside. And at the back of the cabinet, in a clutter of broken dolls, torn pages from books, and little jars of dried up paint, Lena found a bar of metal about 3 inches long that Pelton said was a magnet. Put it up against the truck, he said. It'll stick right on there. Even as she enjoyed the searching, though, Lena couldn't help imagining how it would be for people of Ember to come out into this empty land and try to start a town. How would they turn the hard, cracked earth into fields of crops? What would they build houses with? What would they eat while they chopped at the soil and put together their shelters? A picture rose in her mind of Ember's 400 people scattered across the brown fields like a flock of lost birds, scratching in the dry grass for seeds or bugs, huddling for shade beneath the few trees, trying to build shelters of sticks or straw. She shuddered and made the picture go away. It was best to keep her attention on searching. Maddie didn't do much searching. She didn't care for bending over and creeping underneath things and wedging her large self into small spaces. While Lena and Pelton hunted, she walked around in the fields and the overgrown gardens behind the houses, looking for old fruit trees, wild grapevines, and the kinds of leaves, roots, nuts, and mushrooms that were all right to eat. Lena would look out the window of the house she was poking through and see Maddie wading through the knee-high grass toward a gnarled old apple tree. Or she'd see her wide back in among the bushes as she picked berries. Sometimes Maddie simply sat. Lena would see her settled in an ancient lawn chair, gazing across a field or up a street, not moving at all. What was she thinking about? Lena wondered at those times. She looked so serious. On the evening of the third day, they stopped by a wide, slow part of the river. As the sun went down, they sat on the riverbank, drinking cool tea that Pelton made with mint leaves, and they talked. Pelton told about the places he'd seen, and Maddie and Lena told about Casper's quest in the city, his mad study of the old songs about treasure. "Oh, yes," said Pelton. "I've heard those old rhymes all my life, and my father before me heard them too. It's an old verse, or a song, I think, come down from years ago and scrambled, probably in the process. Everyone says it in a different way, something like this." He sang in a sweet but off-key voice. "There's buried treasure in the ancient city. Remember, remember, from times of old. What's hidden will come to light again. It's far more precious than diamonds and gold." That's the way I heard it, from an old man who lives up in the mountains near Angel Rock. Then I heard another version from Maggie Pierce, over by Falter. She sings it like this. "Remember the city, remember, where treasure is hidden under the ground. The city, always remember, that's where the treasure will be found." Lena stared at him. Her mouth dropped open, her eyebrows flew upward, and her heart thudded in her chest. He laughed. "What are you looking so amazed at? Think you're going to go find this treasure? Nobody believes those old things anymore. They're nursery nonsense, old jingles made up to put babies to sleep." "Some still believe it," said Maddie, "but it's only those with a bit of madness in them, and a good measure of greed." "That's right," said the roamer. "I've known a few like that. One of 'em was sure it was in the old city of San Jose and spent his whole life digging through the ruins, looking for it. Finally died when a chimney fell on him." Maddie snorted. "Such nonsense people believe," she said. Lena was shaking her head. She began to smile. No, she said. "No, you have it wrong." She laughed. She couldn't help it. "It isn't nonsense. It's true. I'm sure. What she suddenly knew seemed so wonderful and astonishing that she leapt up and clapped her hands and laughed again. "You're a silly one," said the roamer. "I'm not silly. The city in that rhyme, it's the city I come from." The roamer cast a sideways glance at Maddie. "What's the matter with her?" he said. "Has she got a fever?" Maddie reached up for Lena's hand. "Calm down now," she said. "Tell us what you're talking about." So Lena explained. "Sing the first line again, the first line of the second song," she said. Pelton eyed her strangely, but he sang. "Remember the city, remember, where treasure is hidden under the ground." "That first line," said Lena, "I'm sure it's meant to be, remember the city of Ember. That's the name of my home. It was under the ground." "Not sure I believe that," said Pelton. I think it's true, said Maddie. They all say it, all the ones who came from there. And what about the treasure then? Pelton asked. It was us, cried Lena. We were the treasure, the people of Ember. She felt a swell of love all of a sudden for her old city. Sing that first song again, the last lines of it. Pelton sang, What's hidden will come to light again. It's far more precious than diamonds and gold. You see, said Lena, come to light. We came up into the light, and we were more precious than diamonds and gold, because they thought we might be the last people, the only ones left. The three of them gazed at each other in wonder. I believe she's right, said Maddie at last. Maybe so, said Pelton. He stared curiously at Lena. You lived underground? So then, for the rest of the evening, Lena told about the city of Ember and how she had been a messenger there and how she and Dune had found the way out. It was late when they finally laid down for the night. Lena couldn't sleep at first, thinking of the old songs and what they meant. Someone, long ago, had hoped that at least a few people would survive and had wanted them to remember her city and the treasure it held, the treasure that was most valuable of all. Herself, her family, and all the generations of people who had lived in that secret place, their purpose, though they didn't know it, to make sure that human beings did not vanish from the world, no matter what happened above. The third town meeting. After the rampage in the plaza, the three town leaders went up to the tower room for an urgent meeting. They flopped into their chairs and sat without speaking for a few moments, staring down at the mess below. What do we do now? Said Wilmer. Ben curled both hands into fists and set them on the table in front of him. The caves people, he said, must leave. Leave? Said Mary. Leave, said Ben. They must go away from here. But they haven't been here 6 months yet, said Wilmer. They must go now, said Ben. It's better for them anyhow to leave before winter really sets in. They won't want to leave, said Wilmer, tugging anxiously at a strand of his hair. I think they understand now that there's nowhere for them to go. They must go, said Ben. We can never feel safe while they're here. If they refuse to go, we will force them to. We have the means to do it. There was a long silence. Ben and Mary glared at each other. Wilmer's eyes darted anxiously between them. At last, Mary set the palms of her hands on the table and took a long breath. You are speaking of the weapon, she said. That's right, said Ben. We have it for situations of dire emergency. I think we have an emergency now. We've never used it before, said Wilmer. We don't even know how to work it. I think it's unwise to use it, said Mary. We've always tried our best not to repeat the mistakes of our ancestors. Using the weapon would be the first step down the path they took. We might not actually have to use the weapon, said Ben. All we have to do is threaten them with it. Just the sight of it will make them do what we say. That is, leave. What you are proposing, said Mary, is sending 400 people to their deaths. Not necessarily, said Ben. The village of Sparks started with almost nothing. Why shouldn't they? It's not true that we started with nothing. The founders of Sparks came here from the old cities, in a truck loaded with enough food and supplies to keep them going for months. These people have nothing at all. We will send a truck with them then, said Ben, with barrels of water, some food, and some basic supplies. That would last them about a week, said Mary. Besides, they have no skills. They haven't had time to learn them. Ben sighed impatiently. Are we supposed to subject our own people to hardship and danger because of a bunch of refugees from a cave? Isn't our job to protect our own people? But if they rebel against this order, said Wilmer, then what? I thought I had made that clear, said Ben. We use force. It's our only option. He pondered for a moment, frowning into the air above Wilmer's head. We'll put the weapon on a truck and take it to the hotel. If they put up any resistance, it'll be right there, ready to use. He thumped a fist on the table. I say we give them a day to prepare. The day after tomorrow, they will leave Sparks, all of them, for good. Shall we vote on it? They nodded. I vote yes, said Ben. They must leave. I vote no, said Mary. Wilmer stared down at his hands. He swallowed. He took a shaky breath. He said, I vote yes. So it was decided. They would make the announcement that very night, calling the people of Ember together after they were through with work and before they went back to the hotel. Ben would be the one to tell them. He would make it clear that the decision was final. End of chapter 22. This is so good. I'm loving it. These books are amazing. These books are really, really good. Okay, let me scroll back up in chat. Grace, enjoy your lurk if you're still lurking. I like that theory. Oh, that the whatever started life is always out there. I like that theory too. When I was reading that, I was like, oh, this is so interesting. I got Thanksgiving tacos. Let's go. Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. I was so hungry. What all did it gave in it? What? Did you eat yet? Not yet. Leave for parents in 20 minutes. Let's go. My dad always had some appetizers for me. Ooh, appetizers are the best. Those are the best. My dad wanted my bros and I to go to Thanksgiving at his wife's sister's house, and we all bailed. She's a rude person, and we don't connect with the family. Aw. You have 3 brothers, and I'm the cutest. Let's go. Of course you are. I get that best to not be around meanness. Yeah. Totally. I totally understand that, Goob. Sometimes family is just, you need to take a step away, right? That's it. That's it. For your own mental health. I have my 2 sisters, Paige you've all seen. She's a babe. She really is. How's your other sis? Does she come around? Candy's streaming today. Yes. Don't they do a Thanksgiving cooking stream every Thanksgiving? I love that. I wish I could do a cooking stream. She's coming today, which I'm excited about. Aw. I know. Candy's food always looks so good. We can't destroy life. Yes. Yes. I know. I love that idea. I meant to say that is... Oh, what's in a Thanksgiving taco? Yes. I know. That would be... is it actually a Thanksgiving taco, or is it just a taco on Thanksgiving kind of thing? Exactly. I wish I was a good cook. Yes, me too. Me too. I can't cook unless it's pre-made out and you just stick it in the oven. That's my kind of cooking. Just normal tacos. Yeah. Okay. Just on Thanksgiving. That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, so let's see. So we've only been streaming for about an hour, and there's 1 chapter left to this part. So then we could either let it go there, or we could start part 3 and just see how long we can go until I have to go, which I think would be good. I think that would be good. I'm going to be traveling to my parents in a few. Let's go. Drive safely. But I'll still be listening. Okay. That'll be fun. Just almost like an audiobook in the car. Let it go there. So you want to stop? You think I should stop at part 3? Because I'll be at my parents'. Oh. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see how long it takes. Because I do think this will be a shorter stream, but I definitely need to stop by an hour from now for sure. For sure. A car audiobook. Yes. Exactly. I don't know how to say those words, Goob, so I'm not going to read them. But with fried egg, steak, black beans. Oh. Go for as long as you like. Pico. Oh my God, I love pico. I love pico, but I can't really eat it anymore because it hurts my stomach. I'll listen to the last part after. Yeah, these all go on YouTube. All these reading streams go on my YouTube. So if you miss any, they're all up there. They get uploaded on Fridays. So they're always going to be uploaded. I usually delete the like chatting bits at the beginning and the end. So the YouTube videos kind of cut that part out and just get straight to the reading, except for like our little chats in between like this, because that would be kind of a pain in the butt to trim down. But yeah, so if you ever miss a reading stream, they're on YouTube. Hello, YouTube fam. I love you all. Please subscribe to my YouTube. It helps a lot. It's Colie's Corner, just like it's above the follower goal. So if you're interested in checking out my YouTube, please go subscribe. Otherwise, let me take a hydration. And let's get on with chapter 23. Getting ready for war. The announcement shocked the people of Ember. That evening, they swarmed through the halls of the Pioneer Hotel in an uproar. People wept and shouted and moaned. In the lobby, Dune encountered a group of people embroiled in a huge argument. "It's the fault of that Hassler boy," shouted someone. "He was the one who started the riot. He was egging people on." "No, he stood up for us. He gave them what they deserved," cried someone else. "He's a troublemaker. He's a hero." Dune started up the stairs. Halfway up, he passed Lizzie. Her face was flushed with excitement. She grabbed his arm. "He won't let them kick us out," she said. "Will he?" "Will who?" said Dune. "Tick. I'm sure he'll save us. He's so brave, isn't he? He'll make them change their minds." She hurried on down the stairs. It was many hours before people went to sleep that night. The noise in the hallways went on and on and on, as some people wailed that they were all going to die, and others vowed to fight, and others gathered up their belongings and stuffed them into sacks. Sag was so frightened by what was happening that he curled up in the corner with his blanket over his head. But Dune and his father and Edward Pocket sat talking for a long time. "I don't see how we could make a town from nothing out in the empty lands," said Dune. "I don't believe they ever thought we could. We'd starve trying to do it. We can't go. They can't make us." His father, who sat leaning against the wall with his knees up, shook his head sadly. "I don't know," he said. "This weapon they have, they could use that to force us out." "But what could it be?" Dune said. "Just one weapon? I don't understand." "To be effective," said Edward Pocket in his most learned tone, "a weapon must come into contact with the person or persons it is used against. The question is, how can one weapon be effective against 400 people? My guess is that it's something very large that could be made to fall on us and crush us." "But where would they hide it if it's that large?" asked Dune. "It would have to be as big as a mountain." "It could be an animal," said Dune's father. "They might have it in a cage in the basement of the town hall, something very fierce that they could let loose on us." "Or it might be something like the poison oak, only worse," said Dune. "Some sort of poison that they could spray on us." His father nodded thoughtfully. "Yes," he said, "that could be it." "But father," said Dune, "we have to fight them, don't you think? No matter what the weapon is, we can't just leave. It's so unfair." Edward Pocket, who had been sitting cross-legged on the floor, scrambled to his feet. He clenched both fists and raised them as if ready to pound someone. "I'm not leaving," he shouted. "Let them try and make me. I'll chain my leg to their big old tree." From under his blanket, Sag moaned. "Besides," Edward went on, "I have work to do here. They need me. They need all of us." He sat down again. "Probably tomorrow they'll change their minds." "I don't think so," said Dune's father. "That Ben sounded serious to me." "So what do we do then, father?" asked Dune. "We fight, don't we?" Dune's father sighed. He stretched his long legs out in front of him and stared down at his knees. "Think about what it would mean to fight," he said. Say we barricade ourselves here in the hotel and refuse to leave. They come at us with their weapon, whatever it is. Some of us are hurt, some die. We go out to meet them with whatever weapons we can find, sticks maybe, or pieces of broken glass. We battle each other. He ran his hand across his head and sighed again. Maybe they set fire to the hotel. Maybe we march into the village and steal food from them and they come after us and beat us. We beat them back. In the end, maybe we damage them so badly that they're too weak to make us leave. What do we have? Friends and neighbors and families dead. A place half destroyed and those left in it full of hatred for us. And we ourselves will have to live with the memory of the terrible things we've done. June pictured all this as his father spoke. He hadn't really imagined before what fighting would be like. But still, he said, at least some of us would survive and have a place to live. If we go out into the empty lands, we'll all die. His father just shook his head. I don't know, Dune. I have to admit, I just don't know what we should do. I know what I'm going to do, said Edward Pocket. What? Asked Dune. Go to bed, said Edward. He stamped over to his closet and crawled in. Wake me up, he said, when you've got all this figured out. An hour or so later, the noise of marching sounded in the hallway, and the thump-thump of knocks on doors, one after the other. Tick's voice rang out. Calling all fighters, he shouted. All fighters. All those who refuse to be banished. Meet at the head of the road. We must make our plan. The footsteps passed, and Dune heard the same message repeated farther down the hall, and again farther yet. He put his clothes and shoes back on. In spite of what his father had said, he still didn't think the people of Ember should agree to go quietly out into the wilderness. Somehow they must resist, and Tick was the only one with a plan. The hall was full of people, a few of them murmuring quietly to each other, most of them silent. All were heading for the stairs. Outside, the night was warm, but a restless wind stirred in the trees, and scraps of cloud flew across the stars. With the others, Dune headed for the meeting place. Tick stood in a patch of moonlight, the dense shrubbery behind him. When people had gathered around, he held up his rod, and all whispering died away. Listen carefully, Tick said. He spoke in a level voice, not loudly, but every word was sharp and clear. The day we've been ordered to leave, the day after tomorrow, we will assemble at dawn at the front of the hotel. Have your weapons with you. There are still many people who haven't made up their minds to fight, and a few who are ready to go meekly into the empty lands following orders. We want to change their minds. Flash your weapons. Shout our battle cry. We will not go. Remind them of the black words of hatred scrawled in mud on the plaza and on the walls of our hotel, and the poison leaves on our doorstep. We will make those cowards ashamed of their weakness. We will make them understand that obedience to evil commands is a disgrace. Most of them, maybe all of them, will join us. And once they have, we will march into the village, loud and defiant and strong, and in the plaza, we will confront the town leaders and make our demands. A few people raised their fists and shouted approval. What are our demands? June asked. He was standing at the front of the crowd, just a few feet from Tick. They are these, said Tick. We demand to be made full citizens of this town, not cast out into the wilderness. We demand to be properly fed. We demand decent places to stay. We demand the end to unfair rules and insults. These seemed reasonable things to ask for, June thought. And if they refuse to agree to our demands, he asked. Then of course we fight. But they have this terrible weapon they talk about, said Dune. What about that? Others echoed his question. Yes, what about it? Tick smiled. His teeth showed white in the moonlight. They have one weapon, he said. We have many. And each weapon, in the right hands, is an engine of power. His voice grew louder. We will attack them, he cried, like this. He raised his steel rod and brought it slashing down so the air whistled around it. The end cut into the ground. He raised it again and whipped it back and forth, striking tree trunks so hard he gnashed their bark. He whirled around and battered the bushes behind him. "You cannot defeat us," he cried to an imaginary enemy. "Right is on our side. We will have your blood. We will break your bones." He went into a frenzy of stabbing and slicing, thrashing wildly among the bushes. Leaves flew, twigs snapped. Something fluttered and fell. Dune saw it. So did Tick. He stopped for a moment and glanced down. At his feet was a half-grown baby bird that must have been huddled deep within the bushes. It flopped onto its side, its beak gaping. "You see," Tick cried, "the enemy falls at my feet." He raised his rod. "With one blow, I—" Dune stepped forward and grabbed Tick's arm. "Don't," he said. Tick tried to pull away. Then he relaxed and lowered his weapon. He grinned. "Okay," he said. "I think it's dead anyhow." He stuck the toe of his shoe beneath the bird and flipped it away into the grass. "But you get the idea," he said, turning back to his warriors. "Imagine hundreds of us doing that. We'll be unbeatable." His face was alight with glee. And that was when Dune's vague, uneasy feelings came together in one clear understanding. Tick wants war. The thought of war excites him and makes him happy. But not me. The thought of war makes me sick. Dune's way parted from Tick's that night. He walked back to the hotel and up the stairs slowly, his heart heavy. He still didn't know what he was going to do the day after tomorrow. All he knew was that he did not want Tick for his commander. He would command himself. End of chapter 23 and end of part 2. So we have finished the first 2 parts of this book. So let me see how many pages are left. Also, Neff, hello, welcome in. Happy Thursday, happy Thanksgiving. All right, let me see how many pages are left completely. So it's about 70 pages left altogether, which is not bad. Happy Thanksgiving! We've been going for about an hour. So I would say we could probably read a little bit more. The next chapter is super short, so we could probably read maybe 2 more chapters, I would say, would be good. And then the next stream of this book we might be able to finish. So I think that would be perfect. So, Car, good luck on your driving. I hope it's going well. Happy full of tacos. Oh my gosh, yes. Yes. Okay. So yeah, let's get going because I do want to read as much as we can today before I have to get off. So, chapter 24. What Torin planned. And this is the beginning of part 3, which is called The Decision. Torin heard the news from old Sal Ramirez, who came in the evening to have the doctor look at his infected eye. "They've been ordered out," said Sal, as Dr. Hester stood over him, pulling his eyelid down. "The cave people, they have to leave day after tomorrow." "That can't be true," said the doctor. She dipped a spoon into a small glass jar full of clear liquid. "Tip your head back," she said. She dripped drops into Sal's eye. "It is true," said Sal. "Ben told him to go." "But how can they?" said the doctor. "There's no place for them to go." "Some of them refused," said Sal. "They said they'd fight." He wiped his eyes. "Ben said he'd bring out the weapon if they did." "The weapon?" The doctor set the jar down on the table and stared at Sal. "Has Ben gone out of his mind?" "Don't know," said Sal. Torin listened from his place on the window seat, shivering with excitement. There was going to be a war, right here in Sparks, and the terrible weapon would be used at last, on the cave people. He had always wanted to know what it was. Now he'd find out. Sal left with a bandage pressed to his eye. The doctor sat down at the table and stared out the window at the flame-colored streak in the western sky. "How have we come to this?" she said, but she didn't seem to be asking Torin. The look on her face caused a little fear to mix with Torin's excitement. He didn't want to be in the war, he thought. He could get hurt. The weapon might be accidentally get him instead of the cave people. He just wanted to see the war, not fight in it. "Where will the war be?" he asked the doctor. "What?" She looked at him as if she'd forgotten he was there. "The war," he said, "day after tomorrow. Where will it be?" "You're talking nonsense," said the doctor. "If there's a war, it will be everywhere." She stood up slowly, hoisting herself with an arm on the table. Her face looked heavy, and she shuffled to her room without saying goodnight. Torin went to bed and lay there a long time with his mind racing. He decided he would get up before anyone else the day after tomorrow, the day the war would begin. He would get dressed. He would take a hunk of cornbread from the kitchen and put it in his pocket. He would take a knife, too, in case the war came close to him. Then he would go down to the plaza and climb to the top of the big pine tree, so high up that he'd be hidden from below. From there, he'd be able to see everything. End of chapter 24. And we'll keep going in just a second. Always got to take a hydration break in between chapters. Chapter 25, Dread at the Last Minute. As Pelton's truck drew near the village of Sparks, Lena was more and more impatient. She longed to see Poppy and Mrs. Murdo and Dune. "Another day's travel," Pelton said. "We'll be in Sparks by tomorrow morning." Lena was too excited to sleep much that night. Her mind galloped forward to the people she would see tomorrow, and backward to everything she'd seen on her journey. She finally fell asleep a few hours before morning, and when she woke, she could feel immediately that something in the air had changed. A wind had arisen, a warm, gusty wind that bent the brown grasses and rattled in the leaves of the trees. The blue of the sky had faded to a hazy gray, and the heat seemed more fiery than ever. She felt something unsettling in the air, a warning, like the first traces of fever when an illness is coming on. "Could be nearly 100 degrees today," said Pelton, "but in a week or two, the heat will start to slack off. The season's changing. You can feel it in the wind." They started out early. After only an hour or so, Lena could see the fields and buildings of Sparks in the distance. She stood up. She was sitting on the front seat of the truck between Maddie and Pelton, and shielded her eyes with her hand to see better. There it was. And now it looked like home to her. The solid little brown houses, the tidy fields around them. When they came to the road that led to the Pioneer Hotel, Lena had a sudden idea. "Let me off here," she said. "I want to tell Dune I'm back. I'll walk the rest of the way." She thanked Pelton for all his help, and he thanked her in return. "Take a few of the things you found," he said. "Whatever you like." She rummaged through the crate until she found the magnifying glass, the magnet, and the little red truck, and she tucked these into her pack. "I'll go into town and help Pelton with the trading," Maddie said to Lena. "I'll meet you later at the doctor's house." Lena jumped down from the truck, her legs strong and springy, her hair flying in the wind. She ran up the road toward the hotel. She expected to see people at the river washing and people sitting on the hotel steps, eating their breakfasts, getting ready for work. But the grounds of the hotel were empty. And when she went inside, she found people milling about the lobby in confusion. Some of them were crying. She saw the two Hoover sisters, one wailing, the other trying to comfort her. And she saw old Nammy Proggs sitting on a rolled-up blanket, grumbling to herself. People were arguing with each other. She heard angry voices and questioning voices, and voices full of fear. For a second, she just stood looking, wondering what was happening. Then someone spotted her. "Lena!" Her name rang out over the hubbub. Faces turned toward her, and people rushed up to her and crowded around her. "You're back! Where have you been? We thought you disappeared forever." Oops, sorry. She saw Clary's face smiling, and she heard the voices of friends from school, and Captain Fleary of the Ember Messengers, and someone who used to work in the shoe store. Are you all right? They said. What a time to come back. Why did you leave? Where have you been? Hands reached for her, arms wrapped her in hugs. She saw a redhead bouncing up and down as Lizzie jumped in the air, trying to see over the crowd. And she saw Mrs. Polster beaming at her and Miss Thorne at her side. I'm fine, she said. I'm so happy to be back. But what's going on here, and where's Dune? I'm here. It was Dune's voice. There he was, just coming down the stairs. She broke away from the welcoming crowd and ran over to him. He didn't speak, just reached out an arm and grabbed her hand. The look on his face startled her. Was he angry? Come outside, he said. She followed him down a passage and out a door in the back of the hotel. There was a small concrete terrace there, bordered by a low wall. Behind the wall, the drooping branches of a dusty tree stirred in the wind. Dune sat down on the wall and pulled her down next to him. For a moment, he said nothing. When he spoke, his voice came out in a rough shout. Where have you been? He said. Don't you know how everyone has been worried about you? Don't you know everyone had thought you were dead? Lena shrank back. I didn't mean to be gone so long, she said. It was a mistake. I thought... Nearly a month you've been gone, Dune said. It was because of the city, Dune. I thought the city would be like those drawings I made. I thought maybe we could go there, all of us, and live there and be happy, she finished weakly. You could have told me you were going, Dune said. I might have wanted to go too. Did you think of that? I didn't really think at all, Lena said. I just saw the chance and went. But if I had thought about it, she frowned, remembering, I'd probably have figured you wouldn't want to come because you were too busy with that tick. Dune's face fell. Oh, he said. Well, you're right. I guess I was. I thought tick might be... Dune stopped, looking flustered. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry too, said Lena. They were silent for a moment. Then Lena said, Shall we forgive each other? All right, said Dune. He smiled. Lena smiled back. But what's going on here? She asked. Why is everyone so upset? They've ordered us out, Lena. They've told us we have to leave tomorrow morning. What? Lena could not take this in. Who has to leave? All of us. All the people of Ember. And go where? Out into the empty lands. We have to make a new life for ourselves, they said. On our own. Lena's mouth dropped open. A wild confusion filled her mind. But how can we? What would we eat? Where would we live? Again, the frightening picture rose in her mind. The people of Ember scattered like fallen birds across a vast, dry landscape. There are wolves out there, she said, and bandits. I know, said Dune, and it will be winter soon. Have you heard of winter? Lena shook her head. When Dune explained, her eyes widened in shock. All this time you've been gone, Lena, they've done terrible things to us. The first thing was that boy Torrin. He told her about the smashed tomatoes that Torrin blamed on him. He said he saw you? Lena said, outraged. Why would he do that? Dune shrugged. Ask him, I don't know. He went on to tell her what else had happened. They've thrown us out of their houses. They've written hateful words on our walls. They've poisoned us with leaves. But why? What did we do to them? Lena said. The wind blew her hair forward over her shoulders. She clutched a handful of tangled strands to hold them still. We ate their food, said Dune. That was the main thing. But other things happened too. He told her about the riot in the plaza and about what happened at the fountain. Now, he said, they've threatened to use their weapon on us if we don't leave. So Tick says we'll use our weapons on them. Our weapons? What weapons? Dune sighed. For the first time, Lena noticed how thin he was. She saw the shadows beneath his eyes. There's so much to tell you, Dune said. and we have only today. But I haven't even been home, Lena said. I have to see Poppy and Mrs. Murdo. Are they still at the doctor's? Is Poppy all right? A scattering of dry leaves blew against her legs. The wind whipped her hair. The whole world had changed suddenly, just in the last half hour. Her throat tightened, and she felt tears threatening. Yes, they're still at the doctor's, Dune said. Come on, I'll go with you. We'll talk there. Wait, said Lena. I brought you a present. 2 presents. She unrolled the pack she'd carried all the way from the city, took out the magnet and the magnifying glass, and handed them to Dune. This one is a magnet, she said. If you put it against something metal, it sticks there. I guess it isn't very useful, but it's interesting. The other one is for making things bigger. I mean, making them look bigger. Thank you, Dune said. He examined his presents curiously. He held the glass up and peered through it at the back of the hotel. Look at something small, Lena said, like a leaf or a bug. Dune rifled among the leaves on the grounds and found an ant, which he set on the palm of his hand. Holding the glass above the ant, he looked through it. Oh, he said, look! You can see its knee joints, and even... He trailed off, absorbed in looking. Then he raised his eyes to Lena. It's like a miracle, he said. He blew the ant from his palm and looked around until he found a beetle. Look at this, he cried. You can see it chewing. He tried a feather and a bit of mothwing and a blade of grass. This is such an amazing world, he said finally, putting the glass and the magnet into his pocket. I love it here, except for the troubles with the people. Lena and Dune went through the village and up the road to the doctor's house. It was still early morning when they got there. When they came through the door, they saw everyone at the table eating breakfast. Mrs. Murdo was facing the door, so she saw them first. She stood up, her spoon still in her hand. She stared for a second, her eyes round, her mouth open, words trying to come out of it. Then she rushed toward Lena and wrapped her in a hug. At the same time, Poppy jumped down from the bench, dashed toward Lena, and hugged her knees. The doctor stood up and watched this reunion wide-eyed. Torin leapt up too, but not to hug Lena. He ran to the door and looked out, and then he cried, Where's Casper? Isn't he here too? Where is he? But no one paid attention to him. They were too busy fussing over Lena, asking questions, and not giving her a chance to answer. Where have you been? Are you all right? Why didn't you tell us? Do you know what's happening here? Poppy yelled, Weena, pick me up, pick me up. And the doctor, thrown into a state of even more confusion than usual, murmured, Some tea? Or, let's see, why don't we all... So glad you're... And all around the edges was Torin, pulling at Lena's sleeve, saying, But why isn't he here? Where is he? When is he coming? And getting no answers. When things calmed down a little, Lena said, Maddie will be coming soon. She stayed in town to help the roamer for a while. Mrs. Murdo stopped smiling and grew stern. Lena, she said, how could you go off like that and not talk to me first? And just leave that careless little note, which was not, I would point out, true. 3 days, you said. It's been 28. That was a thoughtless, foolish thing to do. I know, said Lena. I'm really, really sorry. I didn't know I'd be gone so long. She explained how when she'd overheard Casper, she'd thought he said a day's journey, when he'd really said 5 days' journey. And then she said, other things happened, and it took a long time. Yes, said Mrs. Murdo, and we had a long, long time to worry about you. She picked up Lena's pack, which Lena had dropped on the floor, and set it on the window seat. And you know what's happened here? You know we've been ordered to leave tomorrow? I know, Lena said, but I can't believe it's true. It's true, said Mrs. Murdo. It doesn't please me a bit, but what to do about it, I don't know. Come and have some breakfast. Lena and Dune sat down at the table where the others had been eating raspberries and cream. Though Lena was so thoroughly sick of traveler's cakes that all real food should have looked good to her, she had no appetite. Her stomach was in a knot. I can't eat, she said. I'm not hungry. Dune and I have to talk. At least take an apple, said Mrs. Murdo. First of the season, the doctor added, from up north. Lena took the hard red fruit, and she and Dune went outside. The heat was baking now. They went through the courtyard where the doctor's plant pots were mostly empty, the plants having either been put into the ground or died. The ones still there struggled in the heat, limp or brown. They crossed the road and walked down to the riverbank. Even the river was suffering in the heat. It no longer flowed deep and smooth, but ran in streams between the exposed stones. Its edges were yellow-green and smelly. They sat on the ground. Lena said, "It would take me hours to tell you everything I've seen. But listen, this is the main thing. People had a beautiful city and they wrecked it." "On purpose?" said Dune. "With wars, with fighting. It was horrible, Dune." She shuddered, remembering. "That war, it sort of whispered to me. There was a moment when I could hear screams. I could see flames. And there's nothing left? Almost nothing. And all across the empty lands. Are there houses?" "Some, but they're old and falling down. Mostly it's fields and fields of brown grass. There's howling animals. If we had to go out there and try to live, well, we couldn't. Oops. That's why some people, a lot of people, want to fight." Dune told her about Tick and the weapons he and his warriors had gathered. He explained the plan, how they would go into the village tomorrow, refusing to leave, prepared to fight, and he told her about the terrible weapon the town leaders had threatened to use. "Yes," said Lena, "I've heard about the weapon, too. Torin mentioned it one time. But what is it?" "We don't know," Dune said. "It's from the old times," Lena said. "Then it is so terrible that Tick's little weapons would be like twigs against it. The old weapons could burn whole cities." She clasped her arms around her stomach and bent forward. Everything inside her felt cramped, knotted up. Her hands went slick with sweat. "There can't be war," she said. "But we can't leave either," said Dune. They sat watching the water struggle along between the rocks. The sun blazed down, burning the backs of their necks. "Don't you think," said Dune, "that fighting would be better than just giving in? At least it's doing something." "I don't know," said Lena. "It scares me." She ran her finger over the glossy red skin of the apple Miss Murdo had given her. "I talked a lot to Maddie on my journey," she said at last. "She's wise, Dune. She told me how war gets started. It's when people say, 'You hurt me, so I'll hurt you back.'" "But that's just how people are," said Dune. "Of course when people hurt you, you want to get back at them. And then they want to get back at you, and then you want to get back at them again, only worse. It goes on and on until someone stops it." "Stops it how?" "You have to catch it soon," Maddie said. "As soon as you see it starting, you have to stop it. Otherwise, it can be too late." "But how do you stop it?" "You have to reverse the direction," Lena said. "That's what Maddie told me. She said that if someone had been brave enough, the wars might not have started in the first place." "But Lena," Dune slapped his hand down on the ground next to him. "What does that mean? How do you do it?" Lena wasn't entirely clear about this. She took a bite of the red fruit the doctor had handed to her. It looked as hard as a polished stone, but the juice that burst into her mouth was sweet. "I think it's this," she said. She chewed and swallowed. "Instead of getting back at the other side with something just as bad as they did to you, or something worse, you do something good. Or at least you keep yourself from doing something bad." She took another bite of the apple. "I think that's it. One bad thing after another leads to worse things. So you do a good thing, and that turns it around." Dune sighed. "That's not very helpful," he said. "How are we supposed to do something good for these people who have done so many bad things to us? Why would we even want to?" "Well, that's it," said Lena, wiping apple juice off her chin. "You don't want to, but you do anyway. That's what makes it hard. Maddie said it was very hard. It's much harder to be good than bad," she said. "So what do we do then?" said Dune. His tone was bitter. "Say we'll be happy to work without food. Say we'll be always nice no matter what they do to us." "No," said Lena, "that can't be right." Or should we just go quietly out into the empty lands and not bother them anymore? No, said Lena, that can't be right either. She stared at the water rippling by. She was thinking hard. We don't want to leave, she said, and we don't want to fight. Do you think those are the only two choices? What else could there be? If we don't fight, they'll make us leave. If we don't leave, we'll have to fight. Lena discovered a tough part in the center of the apple, surrounded by some brown seeds. She picked at the seeds with her fingernail. There must be some other way, she said. What if we all just sit down in front of the hotel and refuse to move? We don't leave, but we don't fight. They wouldn't use their weapon on us if we weren't fighting, would they? I don't know, said June. They might. I don't think they would, Lena said. They're not bad people. But we couldn't just sit there forever, June said. Sooner or later, they'd make us leave. They'd pick us all up one by one and load us onto trucks and drive us away. Maybe they wouldn't, Lena said. Maybe we could talk and work something out. I don't think so, said June. Tick and his warriors would never sit around. They want to fight. Lena drew up her knees and rested her chin on them. Something good, she thought. What good act would turn things around? We could volunteer to be roamers, she said, a whole lot of us, so they wouldn't have to feed us, and we could bring things back to them. We don't know how to be roamers, said June. We don't have trucks or oxen. We wouldn't know where to go. We could just say we'll do all the worst jobs, Lena said. But that wouldn't be fair, said June impatiently. Why should we? That's no good. He stood up, slapping the dry grass from his pants. I think it's too late for any of that. None of it's going to work. Lena stayed where she was, still thinking. She desperately wanted to find an answer, but no answer came to her. Her spirits sank, and she suddenly felt tired. Well, then, we just have to be on the lookout, she said. Some chance might turn up. We have to watch for it. I don't know what else to do. She knew how weak and silly this sounded. But to her surprise, June smiled a little. That's like what my father told me when I was working in the pipeworks. Pay attention, he said. It was a good idea then. I suppose it still is. Anyway, I guess it's the best we can do. Lena dropped her apple core on the ground and scuffed some dirt over it, and they trudged back to the doctor's house. June stayed there for lunch instead of going to the Partons, and then he headed back to the hotel. Lena meant to spend the rest of the day thinking as hard as she could about the choice she'd have to make tomorrow. She sat on the window seat sideways, her legs stretched out, and she tried to get her mind to produce ideas. But she kept coming up against two walls. Fight, she didn't want to fight, or leave, she didn't want to leave. A slow fly buzzed against the window. Wind stirred in the grape leaves outside. Think, thought Lena. Pay attention. And then she fell asleep. End of chapter 25.